Have you ever had a week where you were incredibly busy but somehow got almost nothing done? Where you researched and planned and tweaked and reorganized, and yet the thing you actually needed to do never quite happened? That's not a productivity problem, that's a misalignment problem. And today, we're going to talk about how to spot it. Stay tuned. We've been exploring in this series the many ways energetic alignment shows up in building a business. Through identity, through regulating your nervous system, through connecting with purpose and being present with the process. And today, we're looking at the shadow side of all of that. What happens when we're out of alignment? And how sneaky that misalignment can be about disguising itself. Because misalignment rarely announces itself honestly. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you're avoiding something." It's much more subtle than that. It shows up wearing very reasonable looking clothes. And if you don't know what to look for, you can spend months, well, even years, acting out patterns that feel productive, but are actually just keeping you stuck. Let's start with probably the most common disguise, perfectionism. You see, perfectionism is clever because it looks like high standards. It looks like conscientiousness. I just want it to be right before I put it out there. And sure, quality matters, but there's a meaningful difference between genuine craftsmanship and perfectionism as avoidance. Here's how you can tell them apart. Craftsmanship feels engaged and alive. Perfectionism, feels like dread sort of dressed up as diligence. Craftsmanship moves towards completion. Perfectionism finds endless reasons why you're not quite there yet. I worked with a coach I'll call Michelle, who had been working on her website for 8 months. 8 months. She'd hired a designer, written and rewritten her copy, changed her niche twice, and was now reconsidering her brand colors. Her website was genuinely good. But every time we got close to launching something else needed to be revisited. When we finally slowed down and got honest about what was happening, Michelle said something quite, revelatory. If it's not perfect, people will see that I'm not perfect. There it was. Under the perfectionism wasn't a standards problem. It was a visibility problem, a fear of being truly seen and found lacking. The perfectionism was just the bodyguard keeping that fear safely in place. Now, perfectionism is one disguise, but there are plenty of others. Endless research is a common one. I'll just need to learn a little more before I'm ready. There's always another book, another course, another podcast, another certification that will finally give you the missing piece. Except the missing piece was never information. It was courage. Then there's what I call the strategic overcomplication. Suddenly you need a complete funnel, a content calendar, a podcast, a membership site, and a signature framework before you've signed your next client. The strategy tends to expand to fill the space where action should be. And perhaps the most seductive disguise of all, waiting for clarity. I just need to get clearer on my direction first. Clarity sounds so reasonable, so responsible. But genuine clarity usually comes through action, not before it. Waiting for clarity before moving is often just waiting, with a sophisticated justification attached. What all of these have in common is this. They feel like forward motion, while functionally keeping you stuck. They are ways of being very busy in the vicinity of your goals without actually moving toward them. Underneath most of these disguises, if you're willing to look, you'll usually find one of a handful of fears. The fear of visibility, of being truly seen and publicly connected to your work and ideas. Or the fear of responsibility because, success means people are now counting on you, And that's a lot to carry. Or the fear of being found out, the old imposter syndrome story that once people look closely enough, they'll discover you don't really know what you're doing. And sometimes, surprisingly, fear of success itself. Because success would require a version of you that feels unfamiliar, maybe even threatening. See, these fears, they're not weaknesses, they're human. Every entrepreneur I've worked with, myself included, has encountered them in some form. The problem isn't having them. The problem is when we let them run the show from behind this very reasonable-looking mask. Because here's what fear-based avoidance costs you. Energy. Enormous amounts of it. When part of you is pushing forward and another part is quietly hitting the brakes, you burn through a lot of fuel just standing still. Removing that internal friction doesn't just feel better. It actually produces more forward movement than any productivity system that you could, put on top of it. When the internal argument dissolves, energy returns, and alignment removes the brakes. So, how do you start to see your own disguises? Well, the first step is simply noticing your patterns without judgment. What do you reliably do instead of the thing you know you should do? What does your avoidance look like? For some, it's research. For others, it's reorganizing systems. For others, it's jumping to a new idea just as the current one requires some real commitment. Your particular flavor of avoidance is actually useful information. It's pointing directly at where the fear lives. And once you've noticed the patterns, then get curious about what's underneath it. Here are 3 questions I find helpful for this. First, what would success actually require of me? Not in practical terms, in personal terms. What would it mean about who you are? What would need to change? What would be expected of you? And who is expecting that? Sometimes when we look honestly at this, we discover we have complicated feelings about the success that we say we want. The second question, what identity feels threatened? This connects to what we talked about earlier in this series about alignment through identity. Sometimes we're avoiding an action because taking it would mean becoming someone we're not quite sure we're ready to be. A person who charges premium rates, a person who shows up on video, a person who calls themselves an expert. If that identity feels like a stretch, the gap between who you are now and who the action requires you to be can create real resistance. The third question, and this one is simple but surprisingly effective. What would this look like if it were easy? Misalignment often makes things feel harder and more complicated than they need to be. And when you ask this question, you often find a much simpler path hiding underneath all the complexity that you've constructed. Now, here's an exercise to try this week. Take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. And on the left side, write down the actions you know would move your business forward, but that you've been consistently not doing. And on the right side, write down what you've been doing instead. Then sit with that left-hand column. And for each item, ask yourself, what's the story I'm telling myself about why I can't do this yet? And then go one level deeper. What am I afraid this action would mean about me if I did it? Or if I tried and it didn't work? You don't have to fix anything right away. Just seeing the disguise clearly is often enough to begin loosening its grip. Michelle didn't need a new strategy for her website. She just needed to see that the website had become a stand-in for a much older fear. And once she saw it, she launched within 2 weeks. Awareness is the beginning of alignment. Now, one last thing I want to say about this. Spotting your disguises isn't about self-criticism. It's not about catching yourself being lazy or cowardly or self-sabotaging. It's about getting honest with yourself in a spirit of genuine curiosity. The same curiosity we talked about in the last video. Because these patterns aren't character flaws, they're signals. They're your system telling you that something needs attention before you move forward. And when you approach them that way, not as evidence of what's wrong with you, but as clues pointing toward what needs to be resolved, the whole thing gets lighter. Less like self-improvement and more like self-discovery. And that's a much more aligned place to work from. If you'd like a little help unmasking the disguises that keep you from really building your business, I'm here to help. Just contact me at the link in the description below. Now, in our next video, we'll talk about what becomes available once those brakes are removed. How to enter that flow state and what it actually feels like when you're building from a place of full alignment. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. My name is Boehnke, and till next time, I wish you abundance and joy.